90% of consumers read online reviews before visiting a business. What do people see when they look you up online? We give you the tools you need to take control of your reputation. Send surveys to your customers via text message with Testimonial Collector. Get 5-star reviews on all the major platforms like Google, Yelp, and more. Track what people are saying about your business with Reputation Manager. Respond to comments and turn negative reviews into happy customers. See what your competitors' customers are saying about them with Competition Tracker. Learn great marketing tactics and what it takes to stay on top. A bigger social presence means more connections. Automatically generate and schedule engaging social media posts with Social 365. Build trust, boost sales, and grow your business.
Entrepreneur Life Show. Work toward being significant. Entrepreneur Life Show. Don't you worry, success will follow. Entrepreneur Life Show.
Hey there, everybody. Woo! It is Thursday. Welcome back to the Entrepreneur Life Show, where I bring influential, thought-provoking guests on the show for you, not only to entertain you, but to educate you. So I want to thank you all for tuning in, and for those who have been such amazing and faithful followers on the podcast. Even though I can't see you, I see you. I appreciate you with all the downloads. Oh, I'm just so happy. That means you really enjoy the guests that I have on the show that I bring to you to interview. And for those agents and PR agents who just send me the best guests. Let's get the housekeeping out of the way. So to make sure you guys check out Spin Wax Radio, download spinwaxradio.com. And we are also streaming there now also on Spin Wax Radio. So if you are an artist in music and they're into many different genres, check them out. They are always looking for new artists of all types. Make sure that you guys like and subscribe. Check out the website, entrepreneurlifeshow.com. You will see all of the guest lineups coming up for our future guests, as well as all the past interviews and every place that we are streaming where you find your favorite podcast and or watch live streaming. Okay, so who do we have on this show today? So I have John Armato, who is I can't wait to show you guys his video and just what his music. So as you guys know, I've had many different artists on the show. And I would say mine are the best because they're so influential. He's taken his passion for drums, and let me tell you, and turned it into a musical art. So I say a musical art because wait till you actually listen. And I mean, it's like you have to have a skill. It's not just, how do I say this? How can you play music and you get that feeling from it without any words whatsoever, and you just fall in love with it? Well, this is John Armato. We're going to learn all about him, what he does. And when you hear his music, you're going to be like, yeah, I'm going to follow. I'm about to get that. So let's bring John onto the platform and introduce him and get the show started. Hello.
Hello, Rose. How are you?
I am doing wonderful and better now that you're on the show.
Oh, thank you.
Because, when I saw your bio and I went to your YouTube, I saw some interviews, as well as listened, extremely impressed because, I like, for me, I'm not obviously a musician, but the music is an art. It's how you use it. And that's how I connect with music.
Well, yeah, music is all about connections. I mean, it's something you can do by yourself, but when you're providing it for other people to enjoy, it becomes something really special. And it's been the single largest part of my life. It's the one thing that has always characterized who I am and what I do.
So so from what I read, to get started with a few questions I have is that so I gathered, okay, from what I read, you're actually a native of Kansas, but you've kind of moved around from New York to California. I think you're still in California now. Is that correct?
I'm in Sacramento, California. I'm actually from Kansas City, Missouri. My family and friends will want to make sure that I say Missouri, not the Kansas City, but Kansas City, Missouri. Born and raised, and then spent 4 years in New York City, and I've been in Sacramento, California now for about 14 years.
So I know I'm like, what is in Kansas? So I say to you, even though I know Missouri, the show me state, what was your first introduction to music where you decided it was going to be the drums out of the many different instruments that you could have chosen as a youth, that was what you said, this is my passion right here?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I wish I had a better answer. There are some things that we seem to just know or feel from the very beginning. And I've heard a variety of musicians describe the same experience where they can't pinpoint a moment, but it was just always present. And I lost both my parents in the past couple of years, but they would tell you that I was begging for drum lessons about as early as I could talk. It's just something I always wanted to do. And we have a little home movie clip of me getting my very first toy drum at about 5 years old on Christmas Day. And how do you explain it? I don't know. We always had music playing in the house. My folks had great taste. There was musicals and jazz and easy listening and a little bit of popular music. But their era was the 50s, really. I was born in 64 and grew up in the 70s, but I had that early influence. And I just always knew music just has a way of sort of crawling up your spine and plucking a heartstring. And when it does, you resonate and you have no choice. That's just the way it is.
So I know when I was, when listening, doing a bit of research on drums, I'm just talking about the instrument because, of course, when I said, okay, well, I'm going to have him on the show, I'm going to do my little bit of investigation.
I'm impressed.
So from a little bit from what I've done, I know there are many different types of drums. And so then snare, bass, of course, you have your conga guns and then different types of kits that go with the drum. So then my question is, okay, drums became your interest, but then how do you know what type of drum that makes the type of music that interests you to make the sound you want? Because
I have to say,
so many different types.
You're the only. This is the first time anyone's ever asked that. I think that's a fascinating question. I really do. I fell in love with drums. I fell in love with music. I fell in love with jazz, and all three of these things kind of were the same for me initially. Now, I think especially when you're a little kid, the parade goes by, and you hear the loud pulsations of drums. There's something sort of primal and animalistic about that that's just exciting. But again, if my folks were around, they would tell you a story of when I was still a kid, and I had started to get into drums, and I probably had started taking lessons at this point, and I was really into Buddy Rich, and who one of the world's most famous big band drummers, always appeared on the Tonight Show and all this sort of thing. And I remember saying, one of the things I wanted for Christmas was an album by Buddy Rich, but not one with just him. I wanted the full band. Now, where I got an idea that somebody would put out, an album of just drums, which has been done since then, I don't know. But my emphasis was on the music. It was the total experience of the music. So by being exposed to jazz early on, by falling in love with music holistically and not just the instrument itself, I was drawn towards jazz drums. So for me, that's a traditional kit. Like a four-piece, what we call a four-piece drum set, a snare, a tom, and a low tom, and a couple of cymbals, and that's jazz to me, and that's the way I like to make my music, and that's what I fell in love with from the beginning, and still in love with today.
So now that I've got kind of the drum, because unless you have the right sticks, because there are so many sticks. And then I was like, so let me tell you, I was doing my little bit of research. And so I was like, because when I watched your video and then I noticed that there were brushes. So I was like, I know something made this different kind of a sound, but then with the actual drumsticks, you have like the round ball, the acorn. And now,
oh my gosh.
that
You
the
dug
bear,
in.
the teardrop, and then that's just a few, and then of course the brushes, and then how they're made with like I don't know if it's like wire or different hair, and I said, so how do you even know what sound? Because with the drum kit, you still have to make the sound that you want with the type of drum
Yeah.
by the stick.
Well, first of all, your research is extraordinary, and no one's ever dug in that deep out of casual curiosity before. One of the things that is a joy and a frustration about drums is the permutations of the sounds you can make is, for all intents and purposes, infinite. Now, this is a little unfair to my fellow musicians who play other instruments, but if you play a saxophone, you can get different models of saxes. You can use different reeds, different mouthpieces, but then that's kind of it. Those are your variables. With drums, every drum is different. There's a multitude of heads that you can use on any given drum, a multitude of sticks and brushes and mallets and rods and whatever else, and then combine those into whatever setup you want. And it's just such an opportunity to select a sound palette that you like to work from. And I have loved brushes from the very beginning. And it's funny, my sister shared with me a story when she shared some of the videos and write-ups that I've received about the album with some of her colleagues at work. And one of her colleagues said, I never knew they used brushes on drums. And of course, why would you know? Why, it's just a sound that you hear. But I always love that swish that comes when you move the brushes across the head, and it allows you to create a sustained sound, whereas a stick creates a staccato sound. And so to me, the smoothness, this flowing sort of sound, to me, brushes are like water or like air. They're just kind of constantly moving and breathing and flowing. And my very first pair of brushes were bought for me by my mom one Christmas. And mom was had a great voice. She had studied piano as a child, and we had a piano in the basement, and she would play periodically at Christmas, White Christmas, the famous Bing Crosby tune. And as I took drum lessons, she thought it'd be fun for me to accompany her, and she knew that I was drawn to brushes and jazz. And so she bought me my very first pair of brushes so that I could accompany her while she sang White Christmas. And it's one of the warmest memories I have of my early days, learning music and the support I had from my folks.
So if you were to give her, I'm going to assume that it would be trial and error, understanding first, when you get your drum, when you buy the accessories to go with the drum, is really to know what genre and music you want to play or get into to even venture, or is it just trial and error to say, okay, I've gone through a few different things. It's not, I don't understand how that works, because I would think you would have to know your genre.
Yeah, it's a journey. There is some trial and error, and it depends on the mentors and teachers you have and how they guide you. And you almost inevitably will make some mistakes. I bought some equipment early on that was just, it's like, that's not the right cymbal. Drummers are funny. The never-ending quest for the perfect set of cymbals, that is the drummer's journey. And I am 57. I started playing 49 years ago. Was my first drum lesson. And I don't think I arrived at a set of cymbals I loved until about 10 years ago. So, it's like we're always looking for that, to achieve that sound we have in our mind. So, yeah, trial and error. You mature, your ears change, your desires change. While I've always loved jazz, I've also played a little R&B, some top 40, a little bit of country, smooth jazz, traditional mainstream jazz. I've been a gun for hire, so I play what comes along. But speaking of, I use the word journey, and it reminds me, before the show, we were talking about your focus on people's journeys and how they become who they want to be in the context of the businesses and lifestyles they create and that sort of thing. And that's what the album, The Drummer Loves Ballads, is really all about. I mean, it started 40 some odd years ago in a moment that was a moment of rejection, but 40 years later became this album of reflection. reflection on relationships and good memories and gratitude and what's really important in life. That's really how the essence of the album emerged. And I wanted it to be this really unique, full album listening experience. I wanted to tell a story start to beginning. I wanted it to reward the listener for listening closely as well as casually. And I wanted it to be fresh but familiar. I wanted you to say, yeah, there's something new here, but it could also feel like a long lost, loved jazz album. And, honestly, thanks to a huge number of people, 34 people were involved in the production of the album. That's the album we made. And for me, when I think about that journey from that kid in Kansas City, Missouri, experimenting with the different equipment, trying to find what he loves, figuring out how it all works, that journey to today, when now this album has had worldwide airplay and you can buy it everywhere you buy, download, stream your music, whatever, is extraordinary. It's unbelievable to me. And I've just ridden this ride of rhythm on my journey over the years.
So now that kind of moves us into the music part, because before I ask this question, I want people to hear just one of the, I was this particular session that you guys are in, and just one of them. But I'm going to ask the question after that.
Okay.
Because I think it goes directly within what we're about to listen to. So everybody who's listening, that you are on one of your favorite podcasts, make sure you listen in and share it, because this is just it speaks to me. So that's what I'm going to ask about it. So let's share it really quick.
Great.
And so people can hear a bit of it and see if you're streaming somewhere on LinkedIn or wherever you're streaming on. To share that is, I hope this is a dumb question, but that's very, it's romantic, it's jazzful, it speaks to you. And I would think that being an artist, being a musician without lyrics, because many of us listen with lyrics, so that's where you get your inspiration or your feeling, but to be able to play music with no lyrics, but the music speaks to you.
Well, it's interesting. There's a grand tradition in jazz of both instrumental and vocal music, and that's a song called "Memories of You" that was made famous by Benny Goodman, and goes back decades. And so much of music has this sort of twin characteristics, in my opinion. There's something about it when we first hear a piece that we just respond to. But then as we hear it repeatedly, it might become a part of our personal tradition, or it might be connected to certain memories and experiences. And the reason I chose Memories of You to be on the album is because I have always associated that song with a musician I used to play with in Kansas City by the name of Steve Patke, who passed away several years ago from pancreatic cancer. Steve and I were on gigs together for probably 20 years. And I just loved the way he played that tune. And so, most of the time you get requests from the audience. I would always request from the bandstand to Steve. I'd say like, "Hey, Steve, you got to do Memories of You tonight." And so I wanted to do that tune as a tribute to him, as a part of remembering him, and because of the way that made me feel, not just in the moment when I heard that song, but for years as a part of a friendship and a musical relationship. So, again, how those little impulses that ride across the air, because that's all music is air and movement, hits our eardrum, which translates it into an electrical signal that our brain processes. How that, how our bodies and our brains decide, "Ooh, I love that signal and I don't love that signal." I don't know, but I love these signals, and it's now associated with this really warm memory for me. And so that's how it ended up on the record. And the person that you saw playing it is a man by the name of Lynn Zimmer, who's an extraordinary clarinetist, who's had a stellar career, traveling the world and recording with people like Al Hurt and just some really extraordinary musicians.
So when it comes to playing, or I guess like you were saying, pieces that by some influential artists of our time, and then you're going to play that piece, I would think it'd be a somewhat of a pressure, you know what I'm saying? And then how you select the orchestra behind you and the players. How do you know what best fits? I mean, because some people always change things up. It's not exactly what somebody did before.
Right.
You want it to be better, but not competitive. But you want to pay due diligence to the creator, basically.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and you're getting to a really important part of the creative process on this album in general. So I have just a wonderful lifelong friend, my buddy John Carson, who I've known for 35, 40 years or so. And John is a world-class A-list drummer. He, you may know the name Oleta Adams. John is Oleta Adams' drummer, music director, road manager, and husband. And so I've known John and Oleta most of my adult life. As a matter of fact, I turned the day I turned 21, I was listening to Oleta in a local club in Kansas City. So that's how I spent my 21st birthday. So so I asked John if he would be the producer of the album, and he sort of debated. He doesn't like the term producer because he felt like I already had a pretty good vision for the album, but I didn't know how to make it, and he does. So one of the things that we talked a lot about is the tune selection and the way we were going to represent those tunes. And his great piece of advice was, if you're going to record it like it's already been recorded by somebody else, what's the point? And so look for your own stamp on it. And I've always enjoyed, thinking about different ways to approach things. So there's a mix on here. Things like Memories of You, they're pretty much a straight homage. That's how it's pretty traditionally presented. But there are other tunes that we distinctly chose different approaches for a variety of reasons. For instance, there's a song called Poi Sienna, which is sort of the drum feature on here. I've got a layered overdubbed solo that I do on that tune. Well, it's another really old, decades-old tune made famous by the wonderful pianist Ahmad Jamal. And his drummer that he recorded with, Vernel Fournier, had a very distinct New Orleans style drum beat that is incredibly associated with Poi Sienna. When anyone does that tune, that's how they do it. And honestly, we tried a variation of that in the studio, and it just didn't go well. We were going to just dump it. I'm like, I'm not happy with that. I don't think we're pulling it off. It doesn't feel good to me. And on a subsequent session, I said, hey, why don't we try that as a shuffle, a little bit of a different feel, not this sort of Latin New Orleans kind of thing, but a little bit of more of a swing feel. And we tried it and it felt good to us. And that's what's on the album. And that was just an attempt to try something new that felt good in its own way. And then sometimes you just hear things from the start. There's the tune that closes the album is a tune called For All We Know, another classic part of the standard library of jazz. And Rod Fleeman is the guitarist on that. And Rod and I have worked together for years. I just adore his playing. And I just have always thought that tune would make an interesting bolero. Now, it's usually done as a straight ballad, sort of like what you just heard. Shoom, 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 just gentle, swishing kind of sounds. A bolera's it's got this little Latin, sort of sway to it. And I said, I want to try it as a bolero. And I also want to try it as a bolero where I'm really almost exclusively on the cymbals instead of the drums, just because I like that sound. It's purely self-indulgent. And we did it. And we all loved it. And that's how the album ends. So we tried to make some decisions to make things different, to put our own stamp on them. And, musicians, like entrepreneurs in general, I think are preoccupied with possibilities.
Yeah.
What could we do with this? What is possible? Why does it have to be like it's been done before? And so you get a mix on the album of some traditional approaches and some fresher approaches.
So why ballads, though? Is it just, that is your genre? Not to say it's not beautiful, but very sentimental, and being able to connect with your listener. Why that choice of all the
there's so much. My dad used to say that people would talk about nature versus nurture, how our personalities evolve, and what you're sort of born with and how you're cultivated. And he's like, there's always an X factor. There's just some unknown in every individual that you can't explain, that is just a part of who they are. And I can't explain it. I don't know why. I just know that early on, I responded very candidly, emotionally to ballads. And I think that it's consistent with just my personality and my emotional baseline. Frank Sinatra once described himself as being essentially melancholy. And I feel that same sort of emotional baseline. I enjoy a gray and rainy day. And I cry easily at movies and stories and, whatever. And I like to feel things. And I love listening to Tower of Power, Earth, Wind, and Fire, and feeling energy and pumped. I love that too. But there's just something about me as a person that is nostalgic, that is sentimental, that is emotional. And that just, ballads just speak to that part of me. And so when I started playing, I was probably the only kid my age wanting to play brushes. Everyone else was, like I said, rocking out to AC/DC, and that's great. So I wish I had a better explanation for you, other than ballads make me feel, and they make me feel the way I enjoy feeling, and I enjoy playing them to feel that myself and to pass that feeling along to others.
So I do want to bring up the fact that you actually, your background education is communication.
That's right.
So because of that, would you say that background in any way helped you within your music and what you wanted to do? Because like I'm going back and saying, being able to communicate by ear, without lyrics and people being able to understand what you're saying without words. Do you think that communication, that background kind of played a part in what you're doing?
I think unequivocally. There's one of the great designers of the 20th century was Charles Eames. And if people are into mid-century modern aesthetics, they know the famous Charles Eames lounge chair and a variety of things that he and his wife, Ray, designed. And one of his famous quotes is, "Everything connects," that all influences are resources. Everything you experience, everything you try can be tapped for the creative process. And The Drummer Loves Ballads connects all my dots. Everything I've ever loved and feel passionately about and hopefully am good at merged and converged with The Drummer Loves Ballads. So the communications part of it is certainly represented there. We gradually developed this idea of these narrative interludes. So I tell an opening story in Prelude. I have a little narrative interlude in the middle of the album. and at the end, a coda. And it's a chance for me to tell stories through words and to try and talk to the audience about what they're hearing. And so the Prelude is all about describing that moment 40 years ago, that moment of rejection, when I was playing one of my first jam sessions as a 17-year-old kid. And the leader says, after some burning tune like Cherokee, where everyone's trying to play higher and louder and faster than each other, turns around and says, "What do you guys want to play next?" And I said, as a 17-year-old kid, "How about a ballad?" Yeah,
which wouldn't be normal. I wouldn't think.
Nothing normal about that. Nothing normal about that. And he looks at me like I'm insane and says, "A ballad? What's the matter, man? Are you tired?" And I said, because that could be the only possible reason to play a ballad is that you need to lay back. And I'm like, "No, I just love ballads." And he didn't say anything else. And as the story goes, he just turned around and kicked off another tune. I don't remember what it was, but I do remember this. It wasn't a ballad. And that's how the album starts, by me telling that story. And that's purposeful, because as I was working on the project, people kept asking about the title, The Drummer Loves Ballads, where that really came from. And I could see this guy thinking, I'm trying to run a jam session and the drummer loves ballads. So I kept telling people that story. And to his credit, John Carson, again, in his role as producer, said, maybe you tell people that. Let's tell them that on the album. And then once we did that, I decided to set up the one original on the album, At the Trocadero, which is a story about my parents. It's a duet between Lisa Henry, and a vocalist, and Doug Talley, a tenor saxophone player. It tells the story of this long forgotten jazz club in Kansas City that my parents went to when they were dating. I tell a little story about that, and then I close with a story. Well, that all comes from my experience as a writer, a public speaker, a communications professional. And it was natural and comfortable for me to introduce that part of myself and these other parts of my professional lives into the album. So yeah, everything connects. My passion for graphic design. I had a professional designer that I worked with do some refinements and some final layouts, but I did the original design of the cover, and I wanted it to be beautiful as a full package. The writing, the storytelling, the music itself, every part of me that I could put in the album, I did.
So only because you talked about writing, you mentioned writing.
Yeah.
And although, some of the music I've heard are without vocals, do you find that you have to write? Do you write the words to know how you're going to write?
So the one original on the album is At the Trocadero, as I mentioned. Everything else on there is, cover songs. We're doing tunes that were written by others frequently many years ago. Sorry, you're probably hearing some sirens go down the street here. But the one original is At the Trocadero. And honestly, Oleta Adams is responsible for that tune, whether she fully realizes it or not. We were having sort of a series, and I'm gonna come back to the specific question here in a second, but I want people to understand where the song comes from. We would meet in Kansas City periodically at John and Lita's house to work on the project while we were recording in Kansas City or plan the next phase or what have you. And John and I'd spend a lot of the day together. And that evening we were just chatting, and Oleta said, "Well, now you're going to do an original, aren't you?" And I said, "Well, Lita, I don't really write music." And she said, "You can do it. You can do it." And boy, what a beautiful lesson. And, I've always been fortunate. I've always had people in my life who believed in me more than I believed in myself at any given moment. And she got me thinking. And on the flight home, I started thinking like, well, what could I write? And as a writer, I can write words, and I've written lyrics before. I'm not a composer, but Wayne Hawkins, who's the pianist in the quartet, I've mentioned Rod on guitar, Wayne on piano, Gerald Spates is the bass player, and he's wonderful as well. They're all from Kansas City originally. I knew Wayne is a good composer, and so I had him in mind to write the music, of course. And so I started scribbling out some ideas, and I started just thinking about this connection I have to ballads and how much my folks love that same style of music. And growing up, since I was a little kid until literally the day they died, whenever they would hear a really sultry piece of music, something sort of for a slow dance, or that had that great sort of voo-voo tenor saxophone in it, they would always say the same thing to me. That's just like the music we used to hear at the Troc. The Troc was the Trocadero, which was this club in Kansas City. They met in 1955. They dated for 1 year and got married. And that summer of 55, they went to the Trocadero, the Troc in Kansas City frequently. That was their live jazz club of choice. And there was always a little trio there that played this little soft, slow dance kind of music, romantic stuff. And that for them was music they loved, but also music that held these warm memories for them. And I thought I should write something about that. And so I wrote At the Trocadero. And it's their story of falling in love with this club while they were falling in love, and how it played such a role in their memories. Excuse me. Even after they could no longer stand up and dance together in the room like they had 63 years earlier. So for me, it was about writing the words to tell that story, literally handing those off to Wayne, who set it to a beautiful piece of music, and then putting it in the hands of these incredible artists. Lisa Henry is an extraordinary vocalist who's a real stylist and can just exude emotion in the way that she sings. And Doug Talley's this extraordinary tenor sax player that I've worked with years ago in Kansas City. And I just had them both in my head for this song, kind of wrote it for them to play, and they did an incredible job with it. So long story, but that's how I wrote and where it came from.
So I read something somewhere, so I want to read it to you and give me your thoughts on it, what I found that I want to share with you. So it says, a ballad is a form of verse, often as a narrative set to music. The form was often used by poets, composers from the 18th century onwards to produce lyrical ballads. In the later 19th century, the term took on the meaning of a slow form of popular love song that is often used for any type of sentimental, but which can be used in pop, rock, or music. But although the term is associated with the concept of stylized storytelling, song or poem particularly used in the title, such as like media or film, do you think that rule still applies? A ballad is a script?
I think ballads are stories, and I'm so impressed with your preparation. That's really incredible. I didn't.
Yes, I want him on the show. I'm like, I want to entertain my listeners too. So.
No, it's great. Again, as I was working on the album, musicians tend to automatically have an understanding of what a ballad is or what it means in this context. But other people in my life who are non-musicians would occasionally say, what exactly is a ballad? And it's not as easy to describe as I sort of thought it might be at first. And I eventually defaulted to the description or the answer that, if it's something that makes you want to grab somebody and slow dance, it's probably a ballad. So, musically, that's true. But I did start to reflect on its origins, and exactly what you said. It was almost more of a prose or poetry form in its origins. It was a form of storytelling. And as a matter of fact, there's a famous line in the Kurt Douglas movie, Spartacus, the classic film, where Tony Curtis plays Antonidas, and he is asked what he does, and he says, "I'm a singer of songs," but then he recites poetry. That was sort of the origin of this meaning. A ballad was a story, a poetic form. But what appeals to me about what I tried to do with The Drummer Loves Ballads, is that even without lyrics, I tried to sequence the music and present it in such a way that it furthered this total story, that it helped tell a story. And it might be a story you just sort of feel, but it had literal moments too with At the Trocadero. And there's a wonderful song, The Shadows of Paris, that a young vocalist named Lucy Winans, who's extraordinary, sings. We did the tune Moonlight toward the end of the album, which is a duet between the late Molly Hammer and Ron Gutierrez. That's a vocal piece as well. So there are vocal pieces mixed in, but I do think ballads tell stories. And, if you think about, really, faster musical forms, or, like maybe think about a James Brown kind of tune. Those are usually sort of riffs and maybe exciting lines and sort of fun catchphrases, but they may not tell a story. Get on up. There's no real story there.
Yeah,
and, and so a lot of those forms, those hotter forms of swing, whatever, may or may not tell a story. But ballads, you can't just recite a catchphrase. You're going to linger over this slow moving flow and ebb of music. That's the moment where you're conveying a beginning, middle, and end, and a mood and a story. So, yeah, I think the essence of ballads has always been story. And even as a musical form, with or without words, that's what it's trying to do, is to convey this emotional moment.
if there were any particular artists, male, female, whether it be composers, whether it be singers, or musicians playing an instrument, living or past, would you want to play alongside or play for? Have you considered who that would be?
Yeah, boy. Dave Brubeck, the pianist, is somebody that I wish I'd had to. I saw him live with his quartet, his quartet in the '70s, which was his son's actually. But for those who may not know the name right off the bat, everybody is familiar with his music, whether they realize or not. One of the most famous compositions on the radio in 1959 was a song called "Take 5." And people still hear it on elevators today, so to speak. That was a Dave Brubeck tune. He was the second jazz musician to ever appear on the cover of Time magazine. The first was Louis Armstrong. And he just wrote and played beautiful music. When I was in junior high, I found an album in my parents' collection in our Magnavox console, stereo, called Jazz Goes to College. And it was a live recording of the Dave Brubeck Quartet in 1954 from a college tour, which they sort of invented. Brubeck was the first to really reach out to colleges. The young people of the day were hungry for this kind of jazz. And I would come home almost every day from school during my junior high days, put on Jazz Goes to College, lay on the couch, listen to that, drift off. And I have it's probably the one record I've listened to the absolute most in my life. I could sing every note of every solo. It's a part of my DNA. And I have such an affinity for that album and that artist that, yeah, it would have been an extraordinary thing had I had the opportunity to play with Dave. And I've known people who have, but that would be a fantasy for me. An artist, and this may be a little bit unexpected, but an artist that I wish I had gotten to see live and would have been aghast, to use his kind of word, to play with, would have been Sammy Davis Jr. I think Sammy was one of the hardest swinging vocalists, all around musicians ever. And I just, it had that sort of Vegas showroom style to it, but man, he was a hard swinger, and it would have been amazing. But then, from there, Tony Bennett, what an artist! What would it to play brushes on "I Left My Heart in San Francisco" behind Tony Bennett? Just kill me now. And big bands, I'm a Count Basie fan. That if I could ever, drive a big band, man, the Basie band would have been the one.
Well, what are your thoughts on today's music when it comes to? I know that when it comes to movies and film, and from what I've gathered is that orchestras are used often, and
orchestras used
often in movie and film and stuff,
yeah,
which is preferred. And so, but then in today's music, so many people are using electronics versus I'm in my 50s, and even if you don't see the band had so much emphasis on the music, where now everything is just okay, let's do electronic, and you kind of lose that. It's more now, I don't know what to beat. It's no connection. You think that maybe it's being underrated now, that people should be, using real live band or the sound versus this technical kind of keyboard.
Yeah, you're asking a guy, like I said, I'm 57, who is in the "you kids get off my lawn" stage of life.
Right.
So, but we're all a product of our time, and I grew up and fell in love with music in the context of the artist plus the instrument equaled the music, and it's a skill, and it's a interaction between the artifact of the instrument and the artistry of the player, and so I just have an affinity for that. I have a bias, and I love that. I will say that I've gradually gotten more open to other sources, sound sources, because that's really all it's about. We're all just trying to manipulate sounds that will be pleasing to us in one way or another. And if that comes from a computer, so be it. We can't really say it's right or wrong. There's a real subjective element to this. I do think that people who want to make music as young people today should still study music. I wish I had studied more. I had, as you pointed out, my degree was in communications. I had a ton of hours in my college program in music, mostly ensembles. And I wish I did some, but I wish I'd done more music theory and these sorts of things, because my belief is that technique enables passion. So if you have this thing you want to create or do, you're only going to be able to achieve it at a higher level the more technique or technical understanding you have behind it. And I have some limits on what I can do, because if my technique is here, then my passion can only get expressed here. If I want to express my passion at this degree, I'm going to need to get better at some things. So I think everybody who wants to make music should study music at a traditional level, and not just randomly play with sounds. But like I said, you kids get off my lawn.
What you said is why I asked, because I found that there's quite a few performers. I say, like, the singers, but people who sing lyrically, but they're like, they have several. I find the more successful artists have a background and playing different instruments. Then I just see that their music is different, because because they know the instrument, they can write the lyric, they understand what they're going to what they're playing, versus people who just don't have any and they're just singing. Then you just look for a beat.
Yeah, I mean, that's I tend toward that same belief. And I'm not a big pop music listener. I sort of bore easily with that, and I'm looking for a different sort of connection to my music than what that gives me. But I find things that I still like here and there. But a big sort of debate that has gone on as long as I've been alive, and before me, I know, is is jazz in good hands? Is jazz dead? Will jazz survive? And I think jazz is in great hands. I don't worry about jazz. I know people in their 20s who have skills way beyond what I was doing in my 20s. There's this wonderful thing where each generation gets the benefit of all of the previous generations' learnings and experiences, but they get it in a compact, highly condensed form where they get access to it so much quicker. It may take this generation a lifetime to accumulate this knowledge, and then in the course of a few years of study, the next generation gets it all, or has access to it. So I think the skill level of musicians in general just keeps rising. And I love plenty of young musicians on the jazz scene today.
I agree. I don't think jazz is going anywhere. Just like some people used to think that the country wasn't going to, like, oh, it's going to go. It's not, it's kind of tuning out, it's mellowing out. But if you really pay attention to even new artists today, I hear so much from, music from the 60s, the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, and where they're utilizing, sound, because you can only be so creative when you don't, when you you haven't taken any kind of music classes, but
right.
I hear so many things. And then of course when Lady Gaga and Agabublier, and you see, and people are like, oh, like they're thinking like this sound is new. It's like, not really. It's not really new at all. but there's so many artists using the pass on. So I agree. I don't think it's going anywhere. You just, if you hear it, it's there. It's still in the
That's
music.
right. And I think those two know very well what they're doing. I think they know where they're coming from. I think they've done their homework. But you're right. It can be a constant source. You know, I have one of the things I do in my day job on the communication side is I'm a creative strategist, and I help clients build communications programs and develop the ideas that they're going to communicate. And one of my beliefs is counterintuitive. I like to use the phrase "think inside the box, not outside the box." And the metaphor for me is, if there's nothing inside the box, nothing can come out of it. You can only create from what you have. And so the actual creative process is not inventing something out of thin air. The actual creative process is fueling yourself, putting things into your box, metaphorically, that you can draw from and combine into new patterns. So that's the value of broad listening, of studying your history, of your music education, because it simply gives you more to work with. There's a tune I mentioned earlier on the album called "The Shadows of Paris," which was actually written for one of the Pink Panther movies. It's from the soundtrack from A Shot in the Dark. It's a Henry Mancini tune, and it's this beautiful sort of Parisian waltz. It's a lament of an illicit love affair, and I've always liked the tune and wanted to do it, but wanted to do it in a different way, and it became kind of the single on the album. It's gotten the most airplay, and it tends to get the most attention from folks. But we created a prologue to it, which is a portion of the Brahms Third Symphony, Third Movement. So how does one end up taking this 1960s movie soundtrack, faux French waltz, and a German composer's classical piece and put them together? Well, that's stuff I had in my box that I could draw from. And I was thinking about The Shadows of Paris one day as I was doing things here at home, and happened to have the Brahms on in the background. And I've always loved that particular symphony. And I realized, like, oh, I think harmonically that's compatible, and we can make the tempos work together, and it sort of has a similar melancholy mood. And so I went to our arranger and I went to John and I said, I got this crazy idea. I think we can combine the Brahms and Henry Mancini. And that is exactly what you're describing. That's drawing on the past. That is being aware of influences and resources. But you got to have that sort of intent to say, what can I work with? And these two things go together to create a whole new experience of this moment that hasn't been created before.
Well, I really, I know we're coming to the end of the show, but this was such a wonderful interview because it actually educated me. So as you see, I had some stuff I want to learn myself.
Well, you were doing a lot of self-education and preparation. Again, I'm impressed, and thank you for that.
And actually, as I sometimes tell people when I have guests, and some of the guests, it helps. It's so that I can get information. Aside from my listeners. So for everybody who has been watching or listening on your favorite podcast where you download, or maybe on the website where it's streaming, I always want to say thank you always for tuning in and subscribing, and those downloads are amazing. I want to make sure that everybody checks out the website to watch the full interview, and John will let you know where you can find him, but you can also go to the website, entrepreneurlifeshow.com, to connect with John, but he's also going to tell you where you can find him and get his music.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share that with people. The Drummer Loves Ballads is available everywhere you buy, download, or stream your music, all the major platforms. I'd love it if you visited the website, which is thedrummerlovesballads.com. There's some great video liner notes that tell the story behind the tunes. You can buy off of the website. The album looks like this. And there's also kind of a cool little companion booklet that's available separately called That Cool 50s Craze, which is a set.
Was that on the website? I didn't see it.
It's on the website store. So there's a line at the Trocadero, Cocktails and Jazz, That Cool 50s Craze, and inspired me to have 5 custom cocktails commissioned, inspired by pieces of music off the album. So it's kind of a fun add-on that people can check out. But go to the YouTube channel, go to the website, go to Apple Music, Spotify, wherever. For me, this is all about wanting to put a little drop of beauty in the world as my contribution to the universe. And I hope people enjoy it and seek it out.
Well, thank you again for being on the show. I'm extremely appreciative. And for everybody who wants to see who is going to be on next week's show, go to entrepreneurlifeshow.com, check out the calendar, and make sure you like all the guest interviews. Until next Thursday, everybody. See ya. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Until next time.
Entrepreneur.